So what happens when a field like psychology, a discipline built on analyzing other people, decides to turn that powerful microscope back on itself? Well, today we're diving into some really fascinating research where a group of Jungian analysts did just that. They took a critical, and you could even say explosive look at their own foundational ideas. And our guide for this whole exploration is going to be this powerful metaphor from the artist Cornelia Parker. What she did was she took a garden shed, that place where we all store things that we can't quite throw away. She had the British Army blow it up for her, and then she painstakingly suspended every single fragment, every shard of wood, every bent nail in mid-air. She called it cold, dark matter, an exploded view. Just an incredible piece of art. And that right there brings us to the core question of this whole project. What happens when a field like Jungian analysis decides to metaphorically blow up its own analytic shed? To really take a hard look at the theoretical tools that it's stored away for decades. Tools that might be familiar, even cherished, but might also be, well, pretty problematic. So who would actually dare to do something like this? It was the British Jungian Analytic Association, or BJAA. They launched this project that was, you gotta admit, both incredibly brave and probably pretty controversial. To hold their own theories up to a contemporary light and question the very bedrock of their practice.
And look, this wasn't just some abstract academic game. The whole project actually grew out of a really vital and urgent need to engage with racism as a power system, especially within their own largely white profession. So they got 16 analysts together in these reading groups to systematically take apart 4 key concepts that, if you're not careful, could cause some real-world harm.
So what was actually in this analytic shed they blew up? 4 pretty foundational Jungian ideas. First, the concept of the primitive, a term that we now see as just loaded with colonialist baggage and racist implications. Second, this very strict division between inner and outer worlds, which, risks completely ignoring social realities like poverty or systemic racism. Third, contrasexuality. This is the famous anima/animus idea, which is built on a really rigid gender binary. And finally, participation mystique. This idea that suggests a sort of less developed primitive mind merges with its environment. A concept that's just rooted in some really outdated hierarchical thinking. Okay, so with the shed exploded, the researchers started the hard work of sifting through the fragments. And in this case, the fragments were the transcripts of these incredibly intense group discussions. They weren't just looking for opinions, no. They were looking for patterns, for the deeper currents moving underneath the surface. They were basically hunting for clues in the wreckage. And the tool they used for this investigation is a really rigorous method called thematic analysis. You can think of it like being a detective, carefully reading through a bunch of witness statements. You're looking for recurring words, common emotions, shared ideas. You're not just looking at what was said, but the hidden patterns behind the words. It's how they found meaning in all that chaos. And the very first pattern that started to emerge from all this wreckage was this powerful, shared anxiety among all the analysts about the very nature of their job. The researchers gave this theme a name: the work of analysis. Just listen to this analyst's reflection. They describe having an analytic superego on their shoulder, that little internal critic shaped by the entire profession that's constantly judging their every move. What would my colleagues think? I mean, that just reveals this immense pressure, not just to help the patient, but to perform the role of analyst correctly for this invisible audience of their own peers. You see, the key insight here is that proper analysis isn't some fixed objective standard. It's actually a battleground of anxiety. This constant worry about what colleagues think leads to this kind of dynamic policing of the profession's own boundaries. It's a kind of self-regulation that's born from a really deep uncertainty about what it even means to be an analyst in the first place. And of course, this anxiety over the work is completely tied up with the tools they use to do it. And that brings us to the second big theme: frames of reference. These are the theoretical lenses that analysts use, often without even realizing it, to make sense of their world. You can really feel the raw emotion in this quote. This analyst is saying that the concept of the primitive was personally liberating for them. But now, that positive feeling is clashing really painfully with the recognition of its harmful racialized history. I mean, this just reveals a profound conflict. What do you do when a tool you really value is also, well, toxic? And this conflict turned out to be a core finding. The analysts started to realize they were using these core concepts almost automatically without even thinking about it.
These theories aren't just neutral tools. They're woven into their professional identity. So when a theory gets challenged, it feels personal. And ultimately, these frameworks get used defensively, to assert authority, to win arguments, and to try and contain the immense anxiety of the work itself.
And all of this brings us to the third clue. This one became so prominent that the researchers actually had to name it explicitly: power dynamics. This was all about how power was actually operating within the groups themselves, right there in the room. This quote just perfectly captures the essence of that whole theme. It's that sudden, jarring experience of cruising along and then, bam, you hit up against this invisible but totally solid wall of power. It's not some abstract theory. It's a visceral, felt reality. And they saw power showing up everywhere, in professional rivalries, in this constant tension between who had more theoretical knowledge versus who had more clinical experience. But what's really striking is how the unconscious dynamics of the group started to mirror the topic. For example, when they were discussing gender fluidity, the group's own conversation became muddled and confused and couldn't hold a clear position. It was a perfect unconscious enactment of the very issue they were trying to talk about. So, okay, we have our three clues: these anxieties about the work, these deep conflicts over theory, and the overt, in-the-room play of power. But the real aha moment, the real revelation, came when the researchers stepped back and looked at how all these different pieces actually fit together. What's the thread that ties all of this together? What's the one unifying force that explains why policing your practice, clinging to old theories, and asserting your authority are all actually part of the exact same picture? The answer, it turns out, is power dynamics. This wasn't just a third theme sitting alongside the others. No, the researchers realized it was the central, overarching theme. It was the dark matter, if you will, that was holding this entire constellation of findings together. Now, to really get this revelation, we have to use the study's very specific definition of power. It's not a thing someone has. It's not a possession. Instead, they define it as an active process, like a current that's always running through all relationships, constantly influencing them, and creating differences in status and capability. And when you use that definition, all the puzzle pieces just snap right into place. Power is what shapes the work of analysis by deciding what's proper practice. Power operates through the frames of reference by making some theories feel essential, even when we know they're problematic. Power isn't just one aspect of the field, it is the invisible operating system influencing every single interaction, every theoretical choice, and every definition of the work itself. Which, of course, brings us all the way back to our central metaphor. After this deliberate, critical, and pretty painful explosion of the analytic shed, what comes next? What's the so what of such a profound self-examination? And this is the provocative question right at the heart of the research. After you blow up the shed and you suspend all its broken pieces for everyone to see, what happens next? Does it all just collapse into a pile of junk? Or is this a moment for reanimation, a chance to rebuild something new from the fragments, something more conscious, more aware, and better suited for our contemporary world? And we're going to end with this final, haunting quote from the artist herself. This image of something that's caught in this perpetual state, is it re-exploding or is it coming back together? It just perfectly captures the tension of this whole project. It suggests that this kind of critical work, it's not a one-time event. It's a continuous, dynamic, and absolutely vital process of questioning the very foundations on which we all stand.